The ring was gone, and the gilded room seemed to tighten like a clenched fist. That night, the Langston estate looked like a stage meticulously designed for an old-world drama, with vaulted ceilings painted in oils, crystal chandeliers scattering artificial stars, and a red carpet stretching endlessly like a promise never meant to be kept. The air was thick with the scent of aged oak soaked in wine, expensive perfume, and that invisible fragrance that only appears when power believes itself untouchable. Amid the soft clash of glass and laughter, Cassandra Reed, 41 years old, entered like an unexpected drumbeat. Her minimalist black dress traced the shape of disciplined years, her wrist adorned with a watch so thin only those familiar with time could recognize its worth. She was composed, but those calm eyes seemed to read the truth hidden behind the gilded invitation. This was no celebration. It was a test. If the narrator had to choose a vantage point, it would be just behind Cassandra's shoulder, hearing the echo of her heels on marble, watching her name card moved 3 seats away from the table's center, noticing a bottle of premium burgundy poured for the guest to her left, and another from the same region, but the wrong vintage placed before her. A mistake subtle enough to be dismissed, clear enough to say, "You don't belong here." At the head of the table, Arthur Langston, 70 years old, smiled the way people do when they've been trained to, with lips moving at the perfect angle but eyes left dry. His thoughts were elsewhere, on tomorrow's market, opening on leveraged debts, on how the family's history books would praise him for preserving the crown after a $900 million deal. Beside him sat Eleanor Langston, 68, her pearl necklace clicking softly like an hourglass, her steel blue eyes sweeping the room like searchlights, the habitual gaze of someone who calls suspicion intuition. She studied Cassandra and felt that quiet irritation born when a woman refuses to ask permission to exist. A young waiter passed behind Cassandra, eyes lowered. 23, trained to be invisible, in rooms where light always favored the host. In his hands, a crystal tray shimmered like liquid silk. He knew something was off about the seat assigned to the woman in black, knew the ordinary wine bottle had been switched under quiet orders. He avoided Cassandra's gaze, then hated himself for doing so. Rooms like this teach people to breathe smaller, speak smaller, to think smaller. Cassandra sat down, her shoulders relaxed, her breath steady. She wasn't new to chairs placed at the edge. 2 decades earlier, she had stood in hospital corridors at dawn guarding test samples, had been called sweetheart in technical meetings, had watched the word brilliant be replaced with lucky when her project succeeded. She had learned to file every insult into an invisible drawer label, lock it, and wait for the right day to open it again. Dinner began with the low hum of string music gliding over a table of glass and silver laughter rising at the exact moment the cameras turned, stories rehearsed to sound spontaneous about philanthropy, scholarships, legacy. Arthur raised his glass, a new chapter for both sides. In his mind were spreadsheets, in his eyes publicity, and on his tongue words polished to perfection. Eleanor tilted her head and whispered, "Don't let emotion cloud business." To her, emotion was what other people had. She had standards. The pace of the evening slowed. Every small sensation expanded. Under an invisible lens, the warmth of wine on Cassandra's tongue, the chill of the air conditioning brushing her neck, the faint metallic scrape of a brooch snagging on linen. She noticed everything, like a scientist collecting samples. She smiled as the man beside her bragged about technology saving the world, though his eyes flicked at her cheaper bottle. It was fine. She broke a piece of bread, listening to its crisp crack. Somewhere in her chest, a quiet drumbeat kept time. Then came the fracture. "Where's my ring?" Eleanor stood. Not a question, a verdict. Her voice was sharp enough to make a few glasses tremble. Time in the room contracted like a camera lens, zooming in. Heads turned in unison. Phones rose. Someone hit record already, casting themselves as background actors in someone else's scandal. Arthur turned to his wife. "Stay calm." But his eyes lit up. A crisis could be a stage for control. "Call the butler," he murmured, though Eleanor had already chosen her target. She didn't check her bag, didn't look at her chair, didn't question the waiter who'd passed by. She turned toward Cassandra. Her eyes said what the room had always thought, but never dared to voice. She just left the table, Eleanor declared, each word falling like a stone. Murmurs ignited. A gentleman whispered, "Oh dear," his lips barely hiding a smirk. A woman wrapped in fur nodded approvingly. Standards are slipping. The young waiter gripped his tray until his knuckles turned white. Inside Cassandra's mind, a cold river sank deep. Not fear, but clarity. She heard her old professor's voice. "In rooms built on light, people prefer simple shadows. One culprit is easier to understand than a broken system." She placed her napkin down, looked directly at Eleanor, calm as opening a lab door. "I'll open my bag myself," Cassandra said, her tone low but steady, and every microphone in the room seemed to tilt toward her. The zipper hissed softly. A phone, a wallet, a leather notebook with pages folded at pediatric protocol draft, a tube of red lipstick bright as a wax seal. No ring. Phones trembled slightly as the hands that held them began to lose certainty. Arthur leaned forward, as if a different angle might reveal the truth. Eleanor's lips tightened. "Check again." She ordered the waiter, her voice lower now, but cutting deeper. The narrator knew exactly when the dinner went off the rails. It wasn't when Eleanor made the accusation, but when silence started picking sides. One group looked away, pretending neutrality. Another raised their phones, higher, chasing justice in view counts. The rest stared between Cassandra and the empty glass, knowing something was wrong but unsure how to stand in a room where seats had been preassigned. Then the climax tightened. A side door opened. A pale hallway light spilled onto the marble floor. A middle-aged janitor stepped in, his blue gloves still wet. In his palm glinted a diamond ring, throwing cold light across the room. Breath halted. He spoke softly, afraid the truth might shatter. "I found it in the restroom." Silence. Heavy. Then a long exhale, like reading from a script. A forced smile. A familiar spell hung on the walls of reputation. Just a misunderstanding. No apology. No admission of wrong. Just misunderstanding. Cassandra didn't argue. She lifted her phone. On the screen, one short message. "Activate Protocol R. Send." The screen went black, reflecting her face, calm as still water before a storm. At the head of the table, Arthur interlaced his fingers, forcing a smile back into rhythm. A new question flickered in his mind. "She'll swallow this for the deal, won't she?" Eleanor slipped the ring back onto her finger, her skin pale. She pinned her practiced smile in place, though her throat was dry. The young waiter set his tray down quietly, exhaling, his heart torn between the crack of disillusion and the fragile stitch of restored faith in truth. Music resumed. Glasses clinked. The dinner pretended continuity. But one thing had shifted silently, sharply, irreversibly, the order of things. Cassandra looked up at the glittering chandeliers and thought of the children in her clinical trial proposal, waiting for one signature that could save their lives. She thought of boardrooms where endurance was mistaken for professionalism, and she thought of one truth, clean as a scalpel: respect is not a clause. The storm hadn't arrived yet, but the wind had changed. The morning after the dinner, the New York sun poured through the thick glass of the 58th floor of Langston Tower, the family's headquarters gleaming like an old-fashioned boast. Inside, people who lived on borrowed honor from their ancestors were gathered for an emergency meeting. No one mentioned the ring yet. The air still carried the scent of the previous night, the kind of perfume that tried to disguise embarrassment as civility. Arthur Langston sat at the head of the table, holding a tiny cup of espresso, as if to prove he was still in control. Across from him, Eleanor's pearl necklace tapped rhythmically against a crystal glass. "Last night's matter," she said, "has been handled. There's no need for further concern." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "No need, Eleanor. That clip has over 500,000 views in just a few hours, and she, Cassandra Reed, is the one we're supposed to sign a $900 million contract with." Eleanor's smile was thin as thread. It was a misunderstanding. People like her live off emotions. We live off results. At the other end of the table, their eldest son, Daniel, 38, remained silent. A Harvard graduate and manager of the family's investment fund, he prided himself on his rationality. Yet when he remembered his mother pointing at Cassandra, his chest tightened. He had seen the woman's eyes, not afraid, but as if measuring the worth of humanity itself. Daniel opened his mouth to speak, but Arthur stopped him with a look. "We're not here to discuss morality, Daniel. The market doesn't understand compassion." Meanwhile, across the city, Cassandra sat alone in her glass-walled apartment overlooking the Hudson River. Morning sunlight fell across her coffee, her laptop, and the news replaying the clip from last night. She watched herself being told to open her bag, surrounded by lights, judged by silence. The news anchors spoke with careful neutrality, but the comments beneath told a different story, a public courtroom divided in half. Some defended her, others doubted her. She must be arrogant, that's why they hate her. She thinks she's special, just because she's a successful woman of color. Cassandra gave a faint, weary smile, the kind of smile belonging to someone long accustomed to sophisticated excuses for prejudice. Her phone rang. It was Marion, her lawyer, her voice urgent. "Cass, don't do anything rash. We still need this deal. Langston's team will handle internal PR and issue a private apology." Cassandra was silent. A private apology, meaning public humiliation, followed by quiet forgiveness. "Sometimes silence is wisdom," Marion said gently. Marion Cassandra's voice, dropped calm but firm silence, only has value when it's chosen, not when it's imposed. She ended the call and opened her company inbox. Beneath the subject line, "Re-Langston Partnership," were hundreds of emails from employees, wondering what would happen if the deal collapsed. Cassandra understood the weight of that responsibility, but heavier still was the feeling of being reduced to a pitted victim. She didn't want pity. She wanted respect. As dusk settled, a small press conference was held in Langston Group's glass meeting room overlooking Central Park. Eleanor appeared like a noblewoman doing the public a favor. "We deeply regret last night's misunderstanding," she told the press. "Our family has always valued diversity and equality." A reporter asked, "Will you be apologizing directly to Miss Reed?" Eleanor smiled politely. "Everything has been clarified. There's nothing to apologize for." Camera flashes burst like fireworks. In the back row, Daniel looked at his mother, then at his father, nodding approvingly. One thought echoed in his mind. Is this really how we intend to preserve our empire, with polite lies, meanwhile? Cassandra sat in her office, watching the same broadcast. Every word, diversity, equality, misunderstanding, clanged in her ears like metal striking metal, hollow and cold. She opened the file her private investigators had sent, Langston Financial Background. The first page made her pause. Langston Group was drowning in debt, hidden behind shell companies in the Cayman Islands. She realized they didn't just want the deal, they depended on it to survive. And in that instant, the humiliation from last night transformed into something else power. Cassandra started a video call with Aaron Blake, her chief financial officer, a silver-haired man, known for his blunt honesty. He looked at her through the screen. "I need you to prepare an exit strategy," she said succinctly. Aaron frowned. "Cass, you're cancelling the deal. We've invested nearly a year into this. We don't invest in disrespect. But if you do this, the media will explode. They'll call you impulsive emotional. Then let them. Being emotional is still better than being silent in humiliation." After the call, Cassandra stood and walked to the window. The stream of cars below shimmered like threads of light, and in her mind, images from last night replayed chandeliers blazing the word misunderstanding, the trembling hands of the janitor, the wealthy faces certain she'd swallow everything for her company's sake. She turned on her desk lamp and wrote a line in her notebook, September 17th. "They taught me that silence is a weapon. Now I will use it." At Langston Tower that night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stared out over the city, feeling the world around him crack open just slightly, the fracture of conscience. He remembered Cassandra's gaze, and for the first time in his life, he doubted his own kind, the ones born into wealth and convinced that everything could be bought. He sent her a short email untitled, "I'm sorry for staying silent." Cassandra read it at 2 a.m, her smile tinged with sorrow. In her mind, a plan was forming, not for revenge, but for severance. Not with words, but with action, not loudly, but completely. Across town, Eleanor removed her pearl necklace and stood before the mirror, admiring her reflection in the soft, golden light. She was satisfied, believing everything had been contained. But if she'd looked closely, she would have noticed the faint pallor around her wrist, the spot where the diamond ring now gleamed once more, a quiet witness to an unforgivable mistake. And as Langston Tower slept under the city lights on the top floor of Reed Innovations, a single email was sent containing just 7 words: "Withdraw all funds." Effective immediately. No sound followed. No gunfire, no threats. Only a decision, one that had just begun to dismantle an empire once thought unbreakable. The wind off the Hudson brushed against the glass, stirring the white curtain gently. Cassandra closed her notebook and thought to herself, "Tomorrow they'll know, and I won't have to raise my voice." The night sky laid a silver-cold, translucent sheen over Manhattan. Behind the high-glass windows, the city refused to sleep. Yet inside Cassandra Reed's apartment, everything was so still, she could hear her own heartbeat. The ginger tea had gone cold, its steam gone, leaving a quiet circular mark on the table. On her laptop screen, hundreds of new alerts from the press investors and partners waited. Everyone wanted her to speak, or at least to keep silent in the particular way they preferred. Cassandra leaned back in her chair and fixed her eyes on the sky. Reflected in them was the crisscross of lights from Langston Tower across the river, the place where, in only a few hours, a historic deal was scheduled to be signed, a deal she once thought would be the pinnacle of her career. Now it looked like a velvet-lined trap. Her phone buzzed. The name read, Marion Cole. Cass, I just got an update. They have rewritten the program for tomorrow's ceremony. There will be no mention of the ring incident. Eleanor will speak first and call it a new day for both sides. How fitting, Cassandra replied evenly. A new day, beginning with the oldest words. Marion sighed. You know, I used to think that if we stayed quiet long enough, this would pass. Are you sure you want to do this? Marion Cassandra said slowly. I spent half my life earning a seat at this table, not to kneel when they call humiliation misunderstanding. When an insult is renamed with softer language, it only becomes more toxic. The other end fell silent. At last, Marion said quietly, If you have decided, I will stand with you. Thank you. But tomorrow do not come to the signing. I need clean air around me. Cassandra set the phone down and looked at the small photo beside the window, a picture of her in a lab years ago when she was still a research physician. She remembered the long nights mixing solutions until her eyes blurred, remembered the moment her hand shook as she signed the first approval for a pediatric trial. Back then she made a vow never to let anyone define her value by her name, her skin, or her gender. That vow returned tonight sharp as a needle. She opened her laptop and typed a few commands. The security system filled the screen. Confirm action. Withdraw corporate partnership funds. Cassandra drew a breath, moved the cursor to confirm, and paused. She looked around the room. An elegant but unshowy apartment shelves lined with books on philosophy and ethical leadership, a few medals hanging quietly on the wall. Dignity is not a medal, she thought, it is how we behave when no one is clapping. She pressed. The screen flickered, then turned to a cool blue line of text action, executed successfully. One decision, less than a second, with enough weight to shake Wall Street. Meanwhile, in Langston Tower, the lights on the 72nd floor meeting room still burned. Arthur Langston, in a grey pinstripe suit, was reviewing his speech with the communications team. I want the message clear. He said, This is an alliance of tradition and innovation, a legacy meeting the future. And last night a staffer asked. Arthur waved it away. It is past. By morning, the press will forget. Daniel Langston stood near the door listening. His eyes left the pages and settled on his father. Dad, he said softly, have you ever wondered what if we are wrong? Arthur laughed. Son, in this world, the winners do not need to be right. They only need to stand. And if others must kneel for us to stand, that is their choice. The answer fell into the room like a stone into water. No echo, only quiet ripples. Daniel glanced at his wrist where the watch read 11:11. A coincidence, but it felt like a sign. Of what he did not know, only that his chest felt heavy as cold iron. 12:17 a.m. On a lower floor, a night shift employee checked the internal email system. He saw a notice withdraw transaction pending confirmation. He frowned, then assumed accounting had sent it in error, a small glitch in a sea of data. He did not realize he was staring at the first swell of the wave that was about to crash through the tower. Cassandra did not sleep. She stepped onto the balcony and let the Hudson wind slip through her hair. The city still glittered, but inside her, a different light was burning the quiet brightness that follows a choice made. She thought of her father, a machinist, who taught her the first lesson about dignity. You cannot stop people from belittling you, he told her, but you can refuse to lower your head beneath theirs. She smiled softly. I hear you, Dad. By morning the news began to leak. partner banks received orders for simultaneous withdrawals. A chain of urgent emails flashed between London, Singapore, and Dubai Council, all financing related to Langston Group. Arthur still did not know. He was in the green room, adjusting his tie, rehearsing his lines in the mirror. Outside, the public relations team had dressed the stage with a shimmering backdrop, the words, "Historic Partnership Celebration," glowing under camera flashes. Eleanor entered in a cream silk dress, the diamond from last night, sitting neatly on her hand. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice as light as if nothing had happened. Arthur nodded. Ready to make history. She smiled, but a slight tremor clung to the corner of her mouth. Perhaps nerves, perhaps an omen. At that moment, Cassandra stood in her office. She wore a white suit, her hair pinned back, the light catching eyes sharpened like a scalpel. On her desk lay the ceremony invitation. She placed a silver fountain pen on top, touched it lightly, then walked away. She did not need to be there to rewrite history. She only needed to let the truth uncork itself like the wine they poured for the wrong person. The phone rang. It was Aaron. Cass, the banking network, confirmed. The funds are out. They are starting to notice. How long until the news spreads? About an hour. She nodded and looked at the brightening sky. Then she murmured, "The sun will rise on time." 7:05 a.m. Langston Tower Maun lobby. Dozens of reporters crowded in, cameras blazing. Public relations staff rushed to check microphones and arrange seats. Arthur Langston stepped to the podium, his smile perfect as a bank commercial. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "today marks the start of a new era of Partnership Ring." The phone in his secretary's pocket buzzed hard. A banner flashed across the screen. Breaking news: Reed Innovations officially withdraws from the $900 million Langston deal markets. React immediately. The aide stared at Arthur, his face drained of color. Arthur kept speaking smooth as ever, until the murmur swept the room like wind catching flame. Reporters glanced down at their phones. One looked up and shouted, "Mr. Langston, has Ms. Reed just cancelled the deal?" Arthur stopped. For the first time in his life, the flash of cameras felt heavy as a blade. The room shattered into noise. Across town, Cassandra checked the time and sipped the last of her cold tea. She whispered, "It is time." Morning light spilled through the windows, washing the city in pale gold. But inside Langston Tower, a different light snapped on, and this time, no one knew how to switch it off. The noise inside the grand hall of Langston Tower rose like a tidal wave. Reporters lifted their phones, cameras swung into focus, and in that instant, the confident mask on Arthur Langston's face began to crack. He could hear the murmurs, the whispers, and one voice, loud enough to slice through the air. Cassandra Reed just cancelled the entire deal. Eleanor stood behind him, the diamond on her finger frozen mid-air. She looked around and saw the faces of their partners shifting from curiosity to shock, then to fury. A reporter pushed forward, microphone raised. "Mrs. Langston, is this Ms.?" Reed's reaction to the so-called misunderstanding earlier this week. Eleanor tried to hold her smile, but her throat felt strangled. It was just a miscommunication. She managed each word, breaking like glass between her teeth. "The agreement is still—" "No, ma'am," another voice interrupted. "The official statement has been released. Reed Innovations has confirmed the withdrawal of all investment. Morgan and Chase have also frozen all subsidiary loans to Langston Group." Arthur spun toward his assistant, his hand gripping so tightly it turned white. "What is happening?" The assistant couldn't speak, only held out his phone. Across the screen flashed a red breaking headline. Reed Innovations withdraws $900 million partnership. Langston shares crash 32% in opening minutes. Arthur felt his heart pounding like a hammer. Every camera flash was a blade cutting into the reputation he had spent a lifetime building. Eleanor tried to speak, but the only words that escaped her dry lips were, "Impossible." Across town, in Cassandra Reed's office, the air was strangely calm. She stood before the glass wall, gazing down at Wall Street, where people hurried through their morning unaware that an empire had just fallen in silence. The phone rang. It was Aaron Blake, his voice urgent but tinged with awe. "Cass, they're in chaos. Langston stock is in free fall. Everyone's looking for you. Reporters, politicians, partners, even global funds. They want your statement." Cassandra poured more tea, her voice soft, almost serene. "Send them one line. Respect is not negotiable." Aaron was silent for a moment, then let out a dry, proud laugh. "I've worked with you for years, Cass, but today I think you just rewrote the rules of business." "No," she replied. "I only corrected the rules of being human." She returned to her desk and opened her laptop. The inbox overflowed with messages, words of support, words of attack, and a belated apology from Daniel Langston. I stayed silent when I should have spoken. Now I understand that my silence was part of the wrong. Cassandra read the line several times, her eyes softening. She didn't hate Daniel. That man, born into privilege, at least still knew how to feel shame. She typed her reply. "Thank you for acknowledging it. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't speaking, but admitting that you didn't." Meanwhile, Langston Tower had turned into a battlefield. Legal advisors rushed in and out, investors made frantic calls, and public relations staff were crying at their desks, unable to contain the storm. "Cut the feed," Arthur shouted at the media team, as the screens behind him filled with breaking headlines. Langston Group facing collapse. CEO Cassandra Reed cancels deal after public humiliation. Power shift on Wall Street. The reporters didn't leave. Every camera stayed locked, waiting. "Mr. Langston, are the allegations of racial discrimination true? Do you think Miss Reed's actions were retaliation?" Arthur stood motionless, eyes blank. He had given hundreds of speeches in his lifetime, but now there were no words left that could save him. Eleanor stepped beside him, whispering, "Arthur, we have to leave." "Now." He turned toward her. Under the flashes, her face was pale, and the diamond on her hand shimmered like a wound. "She destroyed us," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. Arthur replied slowly, as if waking from a dream. "No, Eleanor, we destroyed ourselves." She only pulled the curtain. News spread like wildfire. Outside the tower, dozens of investors gathered, shouting to see the board of directors. A leading financial newspaper ran the headline, "Silence is power. Reed's refusal sparks corporate revolution." Online, Cassandra's words became a new symbol of leadership. Respect is not a term for negotiation. At a business school in Boston, students in a management ethics class debated her decision. She lost $900 million, but she won the dignity of millions, one said. Another replied, "She didn't lose anything. She just proved that real authority doesn't need to scream it, only needs to know when to say no." In her apartment, Cassandra wasn't watching the news. She was writing by hand in the leather notebook that had followed her since the day she founded her company. "Today, I chose silence instead of defense. I chose to walk away instead of striking back. And in doing so, I won not over them, but over myself." Outside, the rain began to fall softly. Mist blurred the glass, spreading silver-grey streaks like scratches of time. Cassandra looked at her reflection. No longer the woman humiliated under the spotlight, but one who had found her true voice again. The phone rang. It was John Alvarez, the janitor, who had returned the ring. "Ms. Reed, I just wanted to say, that day I was afraid. But I remembered what my mother said. If you see what's right and stay silent, it's no different than lying." Cassandra smiled. "You weren't afraid, John. You were brave. You're the reason I still believe in what's good." They were silent for a long moment, the sound of rain outside becoming a gentle closing score to a tragedy finally released of its weight. At Langston Tower, the crisis continued. The financial system collapsed. Shareholders filed lawsuits. Partners cancelled contracts. Eleanor packed her things and removed the diamond from her hand, now nothing more than a symbol of failure. Daniel entered, placing his resignation on his father's desk. "I'm leaving the company. I can't stay in a place where people are valued less than money." Arthur looked at his son, his eyes brittle as glass about to break. "You think leaving is enough?" "The world doesn't care about right or wrong. Daniel only who survives." Daniel's voice was soft but steady. "Then maybe it's time to build another world." As the sun set, the headlines showed Cassandra walking out of Reed Innovations. No bodyguards, no noise, just a calm smile. Beneath the article, millions of comments appeared, but one was shared more than all the rest. Sometimes, silence isn't weakness. It's the only way for your voice to travel farther than all the noise. And among the flashing news banners, a new era began, one where power was no longer measured by applause, but by the courage to stand and walk away, even when the whole room wants you to kneel. The news spread faster than anyone could have predicted. Within hours, all of Wall Street became a silent earthquake. Red headlines flashed non-stop across every financial screen. Langston Group loses 47% of its market value. Reed Innovations withdraws, capital market reacts sharply. Financial experts and television analysts raced to dissect the cold-blooded move of Cassandra Reed. But on the 58th floor of her headquarters, the atmosphere was remarkably calm, the kind of calm that comes from someone who knows she is right. Cassandra stood by the window, watching the hurried crowd below. There was no thrill of victory within her, only a quiet release, like setting down a weight she had carried for too long. Her eyes closed for a moment, as the first spring rain tapped gently against the glass. In that rhythm, she could almost hear the collapse of an empire that once believed money could disguise any sin. The phone rang. It was Marion Cole, her lawyer voice trembling slightly. "Cass, I just left the newsroom. The whole country is talking about you. Some are calling this the silent revolution of female leadership." "What do you want me to tell the press?" Cassandra's voice was soft. "Tell them nothing. We don't need more words. They will understand through the consequences." She ended the call and sat in her familiar leather chair. On the desk lay a silver pen atop a stack of unsigned contracts. Every agreement tied to the Langston deal would now have to be restructured, but Cassandra felt no panic. She had prepared for this since the night Eleanor Langston pointed at her, as if she were a criminal. She opened her leather notebook and wrote, "I chose silence, not out of fear, but because some voices echo farther without shouting. Today I didn't lose $900 million. I reclaimed what they had forgotten, self-respect." Meanwhile, inside Langston Tower, the mood resembled a funeral. Arthur sat motionless in his executive chair, the phone ringing endlessly unanswered. On the Bloomberg screen before him, red numbers flickered like stains of blood that would not wash away. He had once believed himself invincible, the man who could make the financial world bow. But now a single message, a single decision from the woman he once dismissed, had toppled everything he built like a castle of sand. The door burst open. Daniel entered, his face pale from sleeplessness. "Dad, we need to issue a statement. We have to admit our mistake and apologize to Ms. Reed publicly." Arthur looked up, his tired eyes filled with bitterness. "You don't understand. An apology won't save the stock. It won't save the banks. It won't save our name." Daniel's fists tightened. "No, Dad. An apology won't save our money, but it might save who we are." Arthur let out a sharp, weary laugh. "You're as naive as your mother. This world has no room for the weak." In the corner, Eleanor stood silently. No pearls, no silk dress. She listened to father and son argue, and for the first time in her life, she didn't know which side she belonged to. Everything she had ever believed class, reputation, status, now felt like makeup dissolving in the rain. In the mirror behind her, she saw herself clearly a woman who had used arrogance to hide her fear of being forgotten. That afternoon, Daniel went quietly to the offices of Reed Innovations. He didn't make an appointment. When the secretary hesitated to announce him, Cassandra simply said, "Let him in." Daniel entered stripped of the confidence of an heir, just a man burdened by conscience. He stood before her, his gaze lowered. "I'm not here to defend anything," he said softly. "I just came to say I'm sorry. I watched my mother do something cruel, and I stayed silent because I was afraid of ruining the deal. But you were right. Any contract that demands humiliation to exist doesn't deserve to exist at all." Cassandra looked at him, her eyes no longer cold, but full of compassion. "You don't owe me an apology," she said. "You owe yourself courage. Don't let silence become a habit." Daniel nodded, his voice thick. "Will you ever forgive them?" She smiled faintly. "Forgiveness isn't about whether they deserve it. It's about refusing to carry their weight any longer. But forget never." Her words fell into the glass room like a bell resonating through Daniel's heart and through everyone who would later retell this story. That evening across social media, the hashtag #RespectIsNotNegotiable became a global movement. Thousands of women shared stories of being dismissed, doubted, silenced, and how they chose to rise again. A journalist wrote, "Cassandra Reed didn't cancel a deal. She cancelled a habit, the habit of mistaking women's silence for consent." Cassandra read that article, in the dim light of her office, the desk lamp illuminating half her face. She didn't smile or cry. She only felt peace, the kind that comes when a wound has finally been stitched closed by faith. Night fell. Across the city, Arthur sat alone in his office, holding an old family photo, Daniel as a child, Eleanor young and radiant, and himself a man who once believed the world was his. He set the picture down and murmured, "Maybe I was wrong. Not because I lost, but because I learned nothing from losing." Eleanor entered quietly. "You know, Arthur," she said softly. She didn't take our honor. She just showed the world we never had any. Arthur looked at her. His eyes aged, but touched for the first time with understanding. Meanwhile, Cassandra sat in her office, the city lights shimmering against the glass. She thought of John Alvarez, of the trembling hands that held the diamond ring, of the small act of bravery that saved a truth. She wondered if not for him would she have stayed silent like the rest. She picked up her phone and sent a short message to John. "Thank you for finding the ring and for restoring my faith." Then she put the phone down and gently closed her notebook. The final line of the day was written in bold ink. Silence cannot kill the truth. It only makes the truth grow, waiting to explode. And as Cassandra turned off the light, the city outside still glowed. But somewhere in that darkness, power had shifted hands, not through noise or applause, but through one woman's quiet decision to hold on to her dignity in the middle of the storm. The next morning, New York was filled with a strange kind of air tense, yet clear like the calm after a storm. Every major newspaper carried the same headline, "The Woman Who Said No," "The CEO Who Shook Wall Street." Cassandra Reed's photo appeared everywhere, her steady eyes, her faint smile standing before a dark backdrop. It wasn't the gaze of defiance, but the serenity of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. At the headquarters of Reed Innovations, employees arrived earlier than usual. They passed through the hallway, lined with LED screens, replaying the short interview from the night before. Cassandra had spoken very little, just 11 words. Respect is not negotiable. It's the foundation of every deal. That sentence spread like fire, not because it was grand, but because it was true. In the conference room on the 58th floor, Marion Cole, Aaron Blake, and the executive team waited for Cassandra. When the door opened, everyone stood. "Congratulations. Cass Marion said the whole world is calling you a symbol of ethical leadership." Cassandra smiled lightly. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to be an ordinary person who isn't doubted for who she is." Aaron nodded. "You've done far more than that. Since this morning, at least 3 major investment funds have reached out. They want to form long-term partnerships with us." Cassandra looked up, her expression firm. "Partnerships are welcome. But this time, the first clause must be the respect clause. If they don't sign it, we don't negotiate." Marion looked at her and nodded slowly. "I think that clause will change the way contracts are written in the future." Cassandra smiled faintly. "It's not the contracts that need to change. It's the people." Meanwhile, across the city, Langston Tower had turned into a portrait of chaos. Reporters crowded outside, investors demanded emergency meetings, stocks kept plummeting, and banks tightened their loans. Inside the boardroom, Arthur Langston looked as if he had aged 10 years overnight. "We can renegotiate with her," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "If you apologize publicly, she'll reconsider." Arthur said nothing. He stared at the diamond ring on her hand, the lifeless object that had destroyed their family's honor. "The price of silence," he murmured, "is sometimes an entire empire." Eleanor gripped her hands. "You're just going to let them destroy our name?" Arthur turned to her, his voice calm and cold. "No one has to destroy us. We already did." Daniel entered the room holding a folder. "Dad, I have news. Several non-profit organizations and emerging corporations are forming something called the Ethical Leadership Alliance. They want to partner with Reed to set new standards." And he paused. "They didn't invite Langston Group." Arthur looked at his son and exhaled slowly. "And you're going with them, aren't you?" Daniel's answer was steady. "Yes, because there are some legacies that can't be inherited, only rebuilt." Eleanor opened her mouth to speak, but when she met her son's eyes, she knew everything had moved beyond her control. What she once called power was now just a cracked mask. That afternoon, Cassandra visited a hospital on the outskirts of Brooklyn, where John Alvarez, the janitor, was caring for his wife. She didn't call ahead. When John saw her, he nearly dropped the paper bag of fries he was holding. "Miss Reed, I didn't think you'd actually come." Cassandra smiled. "I owe you a thank you, John. If you hadn't spoken up that night, I might have been buried in their story. He waved his hands, embarrassed. I just did what anyone should do. Cassandra looked at him softly. Yes, but what everyone should do is usually what few have the courage to. They sat together on a wooden bench outside the hospital. The afternoon sun slanted across John's wrinkled hands, the same hands that had saved the dignity of a CEO. Cassandra reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope, but he shook his head quickly. I don't want money, Ms. Reed. It's not money, she said, it's a job offer. Reed Innovations is launching the Integrity Fellowship for people who prove that honesty still exists. I want you to be our ethics training advisor. John's eyes glistened. I don't know what to say. Just say yes. He smiled, the honest smile of someone who never thought doing the right thing could make him respected. Yes. That evening, Cassandra returned to the office. The city lights shimmered outside. In the quiet room, she looked out the window toward the Hudson River, the water glimmering endlessly, as if nothing in the world could stop it from flowing forward. Marion entered, placing a stack of folders on the desk. These are the new partnership proposals. And this, she added, another sheet is today's editorial from the New York Times, When Dignity Becomes the New Legacy of Leadership. Cassandra skimmed through the article and stopped at the last paragraph. In a world where power is often measured by noise, Cassandra Reed has shown that true strength lies in the ability to stand still in the storm without bowing. She folded the paper, her eyes distant. They praise me, Marion, but I don't want this story to end with me. I want it to begin with me. I want other women, people of color, anyone ever dismissed to know they don't need permission to be respected. Marion nodded. I'll make sure it doesn't end here. That night, Cassandra opened her laptop and drafted a letter to every employee. It wasn't about achievements or stock prices, just a short passage. None of us were born to please the world. We were born to be true to ourselves. If one day you must choose between profit and principle, remember this principle will return to you, the only profit that matters. Peace of mind. She pressed send. A gentle breeze brushed against the glass, lifting the curtain. Outside, the moonlight shimmered on the river, glowing like a quiet promise to herself. Cassandra stood gazing down at the sleeping city. She knew this fight wasn't over. There would always be more Langstons in the world. But today, she had begun a new era, one where companies would not only speak of revenue, but of dignity. And in that moment, beneath the dazzling lights of New York, Cassandra Reed closed her eyes and whispered, Legacy is not the wealth we leave behind. Legacy is how we make the world look at itself again. 3 days after Reed Innovations officially withdrew from the deal, America was still talking. The story was no longer just financial news, it had become a social symbol. Television networks replayed the image of Cassandra Reed, walking out of Reed Tower in a white suit, her face calm amid a forest of cameras and flashing lights. A reporter's voice trembled on air. She didn't just shake Wall Street, she rewrote the definition of power. At the same time, a quiet wave spread across the country. On social media, stories began appearing under the hashtag, Respect is not negotiable. A nurse shared how she had been scolded by her supervisor for exposing wrongdoing in her hospital, and how now she finally dared to demand the right to be heard. A black supermarket employee wrote, I used to stay silent when people doubted me because of how I looked. Not anymore. Cassandra's story had become a spark for thousands who had once been forced into silence. On a Thursday night talk show, political commentator Graham Fisher, who had once publicly criticized her, had to correct himself. At first, I thought Miss Reed acted emotionally, putting personal pride above shareholder interests. But after seeing the outcome, I realized something. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was a masterclass in the discipline of power. The audience applauded. The host smiled. It seems Wall Street has to relearn the lesson of dignity. Across the city, Daniel Langston was packing up his office. He had officially resigned, leaving behind the empire his father had built. Inside the cardboard box were family photos, a few documents, and a handwritten letter to Cassandra he never sent Ms. Reed. I used to think power was something inherited. But you showed me that true power is the ability to choose what is right, no matter the cost. Thank you for waking me up. Daniel placed the letter in the drawer and stepped into the hallway. The entire floor was silent, like a cemetery after a storm. Employees kept their heads down, a few with tears in their eyes as he passed. No one said a word. They all knew it was their collective silence that had helped create this tragedy. Arthur Langston sat in his office, staring through frosted glass. His face was hollow, his trembling hands resting on the desk. When Daniel entered, Arthur didn't look up. "Dad, Daniel," said his voice, low but firm. "Do you think if you had just said, 'I'm sorry,' that night things would have been different?" Arthur shook his head slowly. "You're too naive, Daniel. This world doesn't forgive the weak." "No, Dad," Daniel replied. "The world doesn't forgive those who are weak inside." Arthur looked up, his eyes empty. "And you think she's stronger than us?" "I don't think, Dad," Daniel said quietly. "She proved it." That evening, Cassandra appeared at the conference Leadership Beyond Profit. The auditorium was packed, no seats left. People had come not just to hear a CEO speak, but to witness the birth of a movement. Cassandra walked onto the stage. No colored lights, no theme music, just one woman standing beneath a clean white glow. She began with a question. "How many of you have stayed silent when you saw something wrong, afraid of losing your job, your money, or your comfort?" Every hand in the room went up, a sea of hands. She nodded. "Then you know how I felt that night. But I chose not to stay silent, not because I was braver than anyone else, but because I couldn't live one more day inside a silence that makes people smaller." The audience broke into applause, but she raised her hand to stop them. "Don't applaud me. Applaud those who tell the truth when no one stands with them." Then she told the story of the janitor John Alvarez, and how an ordinary man had saved the truth with just 4 words. "I found it." Her voice softened. Sometimes justice doesn't wear a suit. It only needs a heart that refuses to stay silent. In the front row, a young female student wiped her tears. Years later, she would tell this story as the moment she decided to study law to defend the powerless. That same night, Langston Tower was still lit, but the light was no longer power. It was despair. Eleanor Langston sat alone in her vast bedroom, gazing at the city through the window. The diamond ring that had once made her feel important was now just a stone that reminded her of guilt. She removed it, placed it in a wooden box, and for the first time in her life, cried not for money lost, but for the loss of herself. Arthur remained in his office. He watched the video of that fateful night over and over. Each time he paused at the moment, Cassandra unzipped her bag, her eyes looking directly into his. No anger, no fear, only a silent question. "What will you do with the truth?" And he knew. Then he had chosen wrong. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Daniel appeared at a press conference beside Cassandra. He walked calmly onto the stage, looking straight into the cameras. "My name is Daniel Langston. I'm not here to represent my family, but to take responsibility as someone who stayed silent. I want to publicly apologize for allowing prejudice and power to overpower ethics. And I promise this from today forward, I will use my knowledge and influence to support ethical business." The entire room rose to its feet, the applause rolling through like waves. Cassandra stepped forward, shook his hand, their eyes meeting not as victor and defeated, but as two people who had both learned the same lesson. Cassandra spoke into the microphone, her voice warm, yet resolute. "This isn't my story or theirs. This is our story of everyone who once stayed silent and today chooses to speak." Outside sunlight broke through after days of rain. The light fell on the new sign just mounted above the doors of Reed Tower, the Dignity Foundation, Global Initiative for Integrity. Cassandra founded it to fund education, ethics training, and equality programs. Every year, a portion of Reed Innovations' profits would go toward giving voice back to those who were silenced. Across the street, a group of reporters captured her, walking out of the building. No bodyguards, no grandeur, just a woman with a peaceful smile. One reporter called out, "Ms. Reed, if you could go back, would you do anything differently?" Cassandra paused, looking into the distance where the sunlight reflected off the fading glass of Langston Tower. "No," she said softly, "because sometimes for the world to change, someone has to be brave enough to step out of the room of the silent." And as she walked away, the morning wind lifted the hem of her white suit, carrying her words into the air like a quiet message. To millions, dignity is not a commodity. It is a legacy. A week after that historic press conference, the city of New York still pulsed with the echo of transformation. Across the skyscrapers, digital billboards no longer advertised products, but glowed with a single message in bright white letters: "Respect is not negotiable." It wasn't a slogan, it was a declaration of an era. Television networks and major newspapers launched special features called The Reed Effect. Veteran investors debated the meaning of the new corporate ethics, and business schools began hosting seminars about dignity in management. An editorial in the Washington Journal wrote, "Perhaps in the history of modern finance, there has never been a decision as deeply symbolic as this." Cassandra Reed didn't just withdraw from a deal, she pulled the plug on an entire system powered by silence. Inside Reed Innovations, the air was as busy as ever yet, somehow different. Employees smiled, more meetings no longer began with profit targets, but with one question: are we doing the right thing? On the east wall, a new sign had been mounted. The Dignity Foundation, its emblem, a small lamp burning bright against darkness. That morning, Cassandra walked down the hallway in a simple white blouse, carrying a stack of documents. She greeted everyone along the way, her smile calm and kind. When she entered the conference room, the entire team stood up. Marion placed a folder on the table. "Cass, this is the registration form for the Ethical Leadership Alliance. If you sign it, you'll officially become the founding chair." Cassandra looked at the first page, thoughtful. "I don't want this alliance to be just a symbol. I want it to work, to make real change," Aaron spoke up. "We could start by training young leaders, teaching them that power isn't about speaking louder, but listening deeper." Cassandra smiled. "Then let's start today." That afternoon, she visited a nursing home in Queens, where her mother, Gloria Reed, 72 years old, was living. Gloria had been a nurse, raising her daughter alone after her husband's passing. When Cassandra entered, Her mother was reading the newspaper, folded neatly on the page, featuring her daughter. "The whole city is talking about you." "Cassie," she said, her voice trembling with pride. "You did what I was once afraid you'd be too gentle to do." Cassandra sat beside her, holding her hand. "I only did what you taught me. Never bow your head when you know you're right." Gloria looked at her with eyes warm yet deep. "No, Cassie. I taught you that, but you taught me something greater that strength doesn't live in. Shouting, it lives in the silence that has purpose." They looked at each other and laughed softly. Outside the window, the afternoon sun slanted through the trees, catching dust motes, floating in the air like forgotten dreams lit once again. Meanwhile, at Langston Tower, the Empire was gone. The once busy lobby was empty, the company's nameplate removed. Arthur Langston had resigned, and Eleanor had left the city for their coastal estate away from the cameras. In the old office, Daniel was the last to stay. He signed the final documents to dissolve his role as the last Langston executive. When he stepped outside, he looked up. Where the golden Langston logo once hung, only faded paint remained. He murmured softly, as if confessing, "Not every ending is a loss. Some are the beginning of learning how to be human again." Daniel drove straight to Reed Tower. He had arranged to meet Cassandra about the Ethical Alliance project. When he entered, she was standing by the window, gazing down at the street. "You came," she said gently. "Yes. I want to help, not to redeem myself, but because I believe we can change this system." Cassandra turned to face him. "I don't need redemption, Daniel. I need action." He nodded. "Then action it is." She extended her hand, and he took it. In that moment, two people from opposing worlds stood on the same side, an alliance signed not in blood or money, but in awareness. That evening, Cassandra was invited to speak at the Global Leadership Forum. The grand hall was filled with thousands of people, yet as she stepped onto the stage, no one clapped. She motioned that she didn't want applause. Her voice, low and steady, filled the silence, not as a speech, but as a conversation with the conscience of humanity. "I once thought silence kept the peace, but silence only makes the wrong louder. I once thought respect could be negotiated, but when we negotiate respect, we are setting the price for our own worth." She paused, scanning the audience. "I have no regrets about cancelling a $900 million deal, because if signing it meant accepting humiliation, I would have lost more than money. I would have lost the right to look in the mirror without shame." The applause came, then slow at first, then rising in waves through the hall. Cassandra bowed her head slightly, then continued. "I hope that tomorrow, when you sit down to sign your contracts, you ask yourself one simple question. Would I be proud if my child watched this moment one day? If the answer is no, don't sign. No deal is worth trading away your dignity." When the talk ended, people lined up for photos and advice. Cassandra smiled, but quietly slipped out through the side exit, away from the noise. Outside, the rain had begun to fall. She stood under the awning, tilting her face upward, letting the cold drops touch her skin. The wind carried the faint scent of flowers from a nearby park. Cassandra closed her eyes, hearing the voice of her father from long ago. "You can't make the world love you, Cassie, but you can make them respect you." She smiled softly. "Dad, I finally understand." At that moment, her phone buzzed a message from Aaron. "Cass Reuters just announced the Global Impact Award. They've named you the most positively influential person of the year, 2025. She looked at the screen, shook her head, and typed back, "They can keep the award." I just want the world to keep the lesson." That night the city glowed bright with light, but from the top floor of Reed Tower, Cassandra saw something different, countless points of light blending into a sea of brilliance. Each one was a person, a story, a choice between what is right and what is easy. And in her heart, one truth beat steady, once spoken with courage, the truth never dies. That night, the small lamp of the Dignity Foundation continued to burn through the rain, through the wind, a promise that would never fade. Dignity, though buried, will always rise again, and a single small flame, if guarded well, can warm the entire world. 2 months after that event, the world had changed quietly, yet profoundly. Companies that once stayed silent in the face of discrimination were now forced to act. Many global corporations signed what they called the Dignity Pledge, a new foundational clause inspired directly by Cassandra Reed's words. In the modest office of the Dignity Foundation, Cassandra sat with John Alvarez. He was teaching a group of young staff members about the power of speaking the truth. His voice was calm, his hand holding a simple metal ring instead of some luxurious emblem. "The truth doesn't need to shine," he said, "it just needs to be spoken at the right time." Cassandra sat in the back, quietly observing. Every word he said reflected her own journey from the night she was accused to the moment she chose silence and let justice speak for itself. Now, watching the young faces eagerly taking notes, she realized that the storm from that day hadn't ended in destruction. It had begun with an awakening. The media still called her the woman who redefined global business ethics, but Cassandra didn't care about titles. She spent her time teaching meeting students and speaking at schools. Each time she asked them the same question: if you had all the money in the world but lost respect, what would you really have left? One late evening, when the city was lit only by car lights, Cassandra stepped out of the building. On the wall across from her, the glowing words, "Respect is not negotiable," reflected in the glass. She stopped and smiled. Her phone buzzed a message from Marion. "The Dignity Foundation has secured full funding for the next 10 years. Cass, we did it." Cassandra replied simply, "Not us." It was everyone who still believes that kindness has a place in this world. The night wind swept through, carrying the scent of rain and the mist of the Hudson River. Cassandra lifted her face, letting the breeze flow through her hair. In her eyes shimmered a gentle light, like the lamp on John's desk, not dazzling but steady and enduring. She whispered softly, as if speaking to herself, and to all the voices once buried in silence. One person can light the lamp, but to keep it burning, the whole world must protect it. And under the tender glow of the New York night, Cassandra Reed smiled, not the smile of a victor, but of someone who had finally found what was worth living for, and what was worth passing on dignity. On a quiet winter morning, New York was draped in a silver-gray hue, still and serene. From the window of the Dignity Foundation office, Cassandra Reed looked out at the Hudson River curling in steady waves. A year had passed since that fateful night, yet its echo still lived on in every story told, in every choice made by people across the world. On her desk lay a handwritten card from a college student in Texas. "Thank you, ma'am. Because of your story, I found the courage to tell the truth." Cassandra read it and smiled. Those clumsy words carried more weight than any award, because they proved that silence no longer ruled this world. She stepped out onto the balcony, drew in a deep breath of cold air, and said softly, "No one can take away our dignity unless we give it to them." In the distance, the sun was rising. Its first light touched the bold letters mounted across the front of the building. Respect is not negotiable. It shimmered like a reminder to the world that some values can never be priced nor measured by power. Cassandra closed her eyes, her heart at peace. Her story was never the end of a deal, but the beginning of a new era, one where people dare to stand and say, "I deserve respect." As the city awakened, one small light continued to burn, bearing the name Cassandra Reed. And that light from this day on would never fade. From the perspective of an expert in ethical leadership and corporate culture, the journey of Cassandra Reed is not merely a story of power and pain, but a testament to a simple truth, that dignity is the foundation of all lasting success. In a world where people so easily trade integrity for position, she chose to lose everything except herself. And it was that very choice that made her a symbol of her time, a woman who did not use anger to retaliate, but composure to awaken an entire system. If this story makes you believe that respect can never be bought with money, then like this video to share that message, subscribe to the channel, so you never miss a journey where courage and character are illuminated, and comment the phrase that reflects your belief: keep your dignity.